can think that maybe they don't have a revenue leakage. And this is why we said we would like also to learn from everyone who joined today's webinar. We would like to hear from you, and we would like to have this webinar set up a bit differently than usually webinars are set up. We would like to have you all engaged as much as possible. When we say engaged, what we mean by that? Please ask questions during the webinar. Please share also a case with us, and this will be open during the webinar. You will hear more about it. But if you have a case what you already are experiencing or you are already noticing, we will really like to hear about that, and also to try to help you or to assist you, and also to share a couple of insights what we have on our end to help you to grow even more. Okay, I think that I took a bit longer intro, but that's already my trademark to have like these long intros. So let me introduce who is the team behind today's webinar. My name is Hrvoje. I'm a demand generation manager here at Younium, and I will be your host. I sit in Zagreb, Croatia, and in Netherlands, Amsterdam, we have our Walter, commercial director here at Younium, and also subscription expert, who will be our main presenter today. And tuning in all the way from Sweden, from Stockholm, is Monica Torres, and she's our chat host. So as said, we would really like to have you all engaged, and Monica will manage a chat, and she already prepared a really valuable content for all of you that you can take out from this webinar, and that you can maybe take it or learn after it, or maybe, I don't know, share it also with your colleagues. So this is why we also have a chat host this time, and please engage as much as possible. Maybe Monica, you can say hi to all of the attendees.
Hello guys, welcome. Looking forward for this webinar.
And keep an eye on the chat box.
Yes.
Okay, let me also go over a few housekeeping points for today's webinar. We blocked 50 minutes. And in this time, we also recording the webinar. So if I mispronounce something, or if I interrupt Walter in some point of time, you will be always, you always can opportunity to repeat it, because we are going to send you the recording in a few days. What we are also seeing from our webinars is that people are asking us, our attendees and all of you, ask us also for the presentation. So if you would like a presentation, just feel free to drop an email to Monica, and we will also send you the presentation afterwards. We will have two Q&A parts, and this is now this part of the webinar, what I'm mentioning, we would like to have more engagement during it. So one of the Q&A will already happen in the mid of the webinar, and we will have the Q&A part also at the end of the webinar. We will have two polls. And as said, we would like to hear from you. So if you have a case where you notice that the revenue leakage, please send it over in the chat box or send it over to Monica, and we will cover it during this webinar. I don't know if I missed something. I can say we have people all around the world. So we have people from Spain, we're tuning in from Netherlands, from Denmark, from UK. So welcome once again to Younium webinar. And Walter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hrvoje. Also big welcome from my side, of course. Before I dive into the agenda, I really want to emphasize the fact today that we're not just speaking our minds during this webinar, but these are actual topics we already received from existing customers, prospects, and all scenarios and recommendations from today are really from the practical world. So our best goal for today, of course, is that you end up growing your revenue with a few tips that we gave. So to do that, we did our best to make an interesting agenda for today. First, we will have a look at the most common causes of revenue leakage. And after that, we jump straight into the interaction, as we're really keen on hearing your experiences there. We will let you know how at that time. After talking about leakage and negativity for a while, we will kick off with some practical tips on best practice renewal management, after which we will also have an interim Q&A, as Hrvoje mentioned. Also, we discovered at Younium that there's a secret glue between finance and sales departments, bring cooperation and communication there a bit closer together. And of course, we talk about how a good invoice helps customer satisfaction, because we have a billing module, but we also truly believe in that and in the information we will state there, of course. Last but not least, we will provide you with the best metrics to track if you start implementing some of the tips in practice, to make sure you can also measure the success. And of course, we also again then close down at the end with another Q&A for everybody. So that's all for the agenda. kicking off directly with the most common causes of revenue leakage here. I met with a lot of SaaS companies, and I think manual invoicing is probably the most common reason for revenue leakage in the subscription business. Without automation, it often happens that companies forget invoices, which of course means no revenue and payments. This is typically because companies run subscriptions, for instance, in a spreadsheet or other tools that are not linked to the actual engine that sends the invoice. This means that a manual entry is required from the place where the subscription is stored into the system that actually sends out the invoice. Manual entry, of course, remains error prone, in addition to the time you lose by doing that, and causes issues like missing out on sending invoices or sending the invoices twice, which can upset your customer. And if they're really unhappy about that, it can even lead to churn. It sounds far-fetched, but trust me, we have met many companies that had this happen to them in the past. Renewals is a topic we will dive a bit deeper in later on in this webinar, but similar to invoicing, if manual, you can forget to press the renewal button on a contract. Forget that, you probably forget the invoice again, leading to revenue leakage. Also, without proper management of renewals, you miss chance to discuss a new term, talk about new monetized features you have, or upgrade some users. So it even happens that customers told us that they missed out on a renewal, but found out 6 months later, and then having to have that difficult talk with their customers like, yeah, we forgot to invoice you, but we will send it now. Is that okay? Usually that goes one of two ways. Either the customer accepts, but is kind of more unhappy and, not impressed with your professional services, or it goes the other way, where you try to save the relationship with the customer and just skip the invoice and just don't send it and accept the revenue loss for yourself. Both, I guess, are unattractive options. I hope we do not give you the feeling that we are exaggerating this. These are, again, practical examples. Last but not least, a lot of stuff falls through the cracks of communication between the quotation and what finally ends up being the reality in the finance departments and finance systems. For instance, customers have requested specific payment terms, which sales allowed, but finance didn't know. And then they start spamming reminders, again, leading to unhappy customers or even churn. Also, sales have negotiated maybe specific billing terms, which are not supported by the finance system, meaning a lot of manual labor, which again can lead to mistakes, and mistakes lead to your customers being unhappy. So, trust me, we have made a selection of a few examples from our customers. I mean, there's probably 10 more of these we can put on screen. But yeah, I'm really curious what you guys think about this today. So jumping straight into the interaction there, we have a poll set up for you, Revoya.
Yeah, and before we lift up the poll, as mentioned, if you have a case, and already one dropped in and we are really happy about it. So, but if you have other attendees, please send us the case and we will like to look at it. If not, maybe during this webinar, but Walter will check it. That's for sure afterwards. So yeah, it's open. The floor is also open for you guys. But let me lift up the poll. So do you recognize any of the previous causes for revenue leakage? So as Walter mentioned, these are the pulled out by the example. So it really happened. So I think that maybe in the talks with your colleagues, you could hear someone experiencing the same thing, and that's totally normal that it's happening. Of course, if you don't have the engine, what Walter mentioned. Okay, let me give a couple of seconds more. Results, kind of interesting. 83% said yes, while we have also 17% on the no. Walter, could you give us maybe some info and your thoughts about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the yes ones, I think is a good sign that we picked the most common ones which our customers gave us, right? And the prospects we talked about, and the reasons for selecting a tool like Younium are kind of in those specific areas of revenue leakage. So it's good to see that we made a good selection. For those who do not recognize it, very good, I guess. There's probably also Maybe you have experienced other reasons. So again, as we keep stressing, if you have that case, like it's not on the it wasn't on the content yet, but you have something that is similar, please let us know. But in general, I think yeah, most of the companies we speak to would have the same kind of percentage rating that recognized at least these. I think most common one is probably between sales and finance. That salesperson was just so eager to close the deal that some details got left out because it was part of the May commission, so he needed to sign it yesterday, but there was not yet an invoice email. Probably a lot of us recognize those cases, I guess. So yeah, that's my feedback on it.
Shall we also discuss the case? And Monica now sent me over the one, and we are really grateful to have the case here. Sure. That we can walk it over. So the attendees ask, we are currently running our subscriptions in the Excel and performing invoicing semi-automated in the finance system. So every month we take the subscription sheet and then enter the amount that is to be invoiced to the account in the finance system. We indeed, unfortunately, have had the case where the amount was entered wrong and got into discussion and with customers and decided to credit the invoice. We thought it is best to credit the invoice rather than upsetting the customer. Yeah, that's exactly, I think, that kind of aligns with the top one we had on the previous slide. I think a very common case. That's why it was also on top of our slide. So you're not alone. That's good. I think the way you handled that situation is also best because in the long term, a happy customer stays on board longer because now you suck it up. The invoice goes on you, and you accept the loss. But in the long term, your customer didn't suffer because of it. So it's likely when renewals come up that they're still happy. They didn't experience that bad thing. So it is likely that next year you will be able to send the invoice, and the year after that as well. So I think it's good the way you handled it, and I hope during this webinar we give you a few more tips on how to prevent it from happening. Cool. Let me just mention one more time. So the cases are still open. Just feel free to send them over, and if you don't cover them today, Walter will cover them via email, and we are more than happy to discuss it further. Okay, Walter, let me give the mic back to you. Good. Let me close this. So, renewal management. So let's first tackle the renewal part and see how we can not only manage renewals better, but also monetize our renewal process. So first thing, sounds probably obvious, but we need to try and ensure we get the highest renewal rates possible. So for that, we have made 4 tips for you today. First tip is stay ahead. We see a lot of companies that schedule a meeting like 1 week before renewal or notice period dates and ask if the customer is happy with their service. This is probably, as you can guess, a bit too late, as you leave no room for any actions that can restore or repair a relationship or product or whatever and save the renewal. The best practice is to do this at least 3 months before the notice or renewal dates. So that's the first tip we have there. 2, monitor the behavior of your customers. Ensure you're aware of which buttons your customers are pressing within your tool. If they complain they're not satisfied with your solution, it can simply be because they don't know everything your solution has to offer. There are a lot of tools out there that can actually track this. You can, don't want to be too techy here, but you can actually embed that in your code or something, and it shows you like, customers only on field A and B and never on C, or in module A, B and never on C, things like that. But again, if you stay close to your customer throughout their stay, you can probably also gauge, their usage experience throughout their life cycle. But there's also ways to automate that. The third one is to be mindful of what your competitors are doing. So, the market pricing or, even pricing and packaging together can sometimes, unfortunately, yeah. Sorry, Walter, we got you frozen for a second there. Oh, okay. Am I back? Where was I? 5 seconds.
Competitors.
Yeah. Competitors. Okay, I'll just start with competitors. Sorry for the sentence.
The third is to watch what your competitors are doing. So, market pricing can really change throughout the year. Your competitors, if correct, don't sit still. So they probably review what they should be doing. And if you don't pay attention and are mindful to that, your customers, even though happy, can unfortunately also decide on price. It can be a determining factor. So if they see like your competitor is 100 euros cheaper, even though you were better, it can be, the reason the customer can leave you. So make sure you know what happens in the market there. Last but not least, it's really important to focus your efforts. So if you have kind of a larger customer base, it is likely that you have kind of a called revenue spread. Maybe you have 50% smaller customers, 30% mid-sized customers, and 20% larger customers in terms of revenue that they represent to your business. So rather than spending money on getting each customer, you have a dedicated account manager. Make sure you know kind of their customers' NPS, the Net Promoter Score, that tells you how happy they are, and weigh that against the value they represent to your business on the contract level. So, and then you can allocate your customer success resources the best you can to ensure the customer gets the required attention, and make sure you renew most revenue to your business, not maybe only most quantity of customers, but also most revenue. The good thing about just these 4 tips is that they do not require any expensive tools or anything, but they require a world-class customer success team. So make sure you share this with your colleagues for inspiration to increase both the Net Promoter Score and renewal rates, and therefore ultimately, of course, revenue. Just a quick terminology lesson in renewals, not always obvious to everybody. You probably all heard or have experienced the automatic renewal. It's the renewal form you probably have at Netflix, where each month or year the subscription just keeps on going and continues until you say stop before the actual notice period. Active renewals are kind of a bit different. So the contract automatically expires after the first agreed term, and a new term has to be negotiated. What you see is active renewals are often used by companies that have more of a pay-as-you-grow kind of model. So if your customer grows in terms of usage of your product, in terms of anything else that impacts the price, that's when you probably have, active renewals to make sure that you find a place to talk, gauge where your customer is, and see if you can grow on the contract. This is just quick terminology because it comes up in the slide after this. So let's go to the real positive and grow revenue. And to grow revenue, let's start with a fun fact. According to many research studies, an average SaaS companies grow 16% of their annual contract value simply by upselling to existing customers. So this is quite amazing growth on customers you already have, right? This means your customer success is not a cost of maintaining customers, but it's an actual revenue driving engine. So how can you grow revenue on renewals is you ensure you find an opening to talk about new modules or monetized features during the pre-phase and negotiation phase of the renewal. We already just talked about how you ensure you talk with your customers more than enough time before the actual renewal. So ensure this is included in that chat. Second one is indexation. It should always be included in the original offer and is probably applied at the time agreed. It should be properly applied at the time agreed, at least. A lot of companies apply indexation either on maybe the renewal point or at a fixed point in the year, like every January 1st, we index our pricing. But again, a lot of companies struggle with this due to the manual labor and forget some customers or apply wrong percentages and amounts. If you index too much, I think your customers will like that. So this is a real good one to grow if you manage it properly to grow revenue. Make sure you perform market research. We also talked a bit on that in the previous slide, but really, make sure you know the role pricing will play in the renewal conversations. What other features have competitors released that can move your customers away from them? Ensure you're aware of this and what's in their mind, what's in your customer's mind, and either have like a roadmap story to back up like the missing feature, or, as we're trained in the commercial world, ask the important question to your customer: why is this feature the competitor has important to you? Because the answer can be, we're thinking about releasing X to our customers late next year. that's when you know you have time. You bought time to maybe fill up the gap with discounts and say, until the roadmap catches up, we'll give you X% off, so you're not missing out and you can stay with us. So those are like good tips on being aware of the market. Last but not least, I don't see a lot of companies do this. I also know that we are not perfect in this. We should do this better. But turn your customers into advocates. Can they refer you to other customers? Doesn't hurt to ask, right? I mean, never hurts to ask. You can make this even stronger by running maybe endorsement and incentive programs. So your customers are rewarded by the referral. So if they call another prospect like, hey, you should use Younium, you get 3 months free of charge. Yay! So both benefit from the discount, and you just grow revenue on the base if they're happy. So on the renewal likeliness story we just mentioned, a strong customer success team can play the crucial part. But we believe with these 4 tips, if you want to grow, it's best to use kind of a subscription management hub that triggers renewals timings, handles renewal performance reporting, and also applies, the indexation that you agreed with your customer. Because if you do that manually, so many customers I spoke to just didn't do it because it's too much of a hassle. We didn't know what was agreed. We don't know how to apply it. And then you just leave, 3% indexation on your revenue can be quite a lot of money. So easy investment, I would say. So that's, the 4 tips on growing revenue on renewal specifically. I've been talking a lot. Time to hear again from my friend from Croatia.
Yeah, and a really good slide. In one moment, you got me back on our kickoff in mid of this year when we were talking actually about a couple of these points, what you mentioned, and how important it is to have this renewal management in place. Really good insights there, as always. Okay, let us kick up lift up the second poll of the day and of today's webinar. And this time, we would like to hear from you. Do you have a tool and/or a process to manage renewals? And you can give us here a multiple choice if you like, of course. We have a tool, we have a process, we have both or neither. So, kind of no need for a multiple choice there. But anyways, we would really like to hear on this one from all of you, and that Walter also gave us a couple of comments on it. So, do you have a tool and/or a process to manage your renewals? Let's give a couple more seconds. Cool. And I will leave the results that we also comment on those. So what we could see, it's really interesting. So we have also on the both side, the 40%, we have in the process 40%. And there is also attendees who are using a tool. So really interesting to see that they are like a mix of answers there. Could you give us a bit of a comment, Walter, on it?
Yeah, I think it's quite funny. So if you have a tool, the dependency on the process is less. If you have a good process, the dependency on the tool is less. If you have both, I would argue you're quite bulletproof in the way you handle renewals. Because the tool will always remind your process to do things, and your process will always guide that you have the proper tooling and the facts in place to run the proper conversations. Nice to see that there's no customers or attendees today that says neither, because that's if I speak, it doesn't match with what with the companies I speak to, but I of course speak to the front cycle of things, so it could be neither for a lot of these. But renewal management is often for a lot of companies is a spreadsheet, and they have the contract terms, and they have like a monthly Outlook or Gmail, whatever calendar, let's check the renewals and do it. It happens a lot, so it's real interesting to see that our audience is already kind of mature in this process. Very good. Yeah. Shall we move on, Avoya?
Yeah, the floor is yours, and still inviting, if you guys or attendants or an audience, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat box. Monica is monitoring those, and we will be more than happy to take them also during the webinar.
Great. So,
as mentioned, okay, good intro on my end. Okay, let's see. So let's take a bit of also that Walter takes a bit of a sip of water, and
Cheers.
Have any questions, this is a good time now to take a first Q&A part of today's webinar. And yeah, as said, we will really like to hear from you, and also to have this not as a one-way street, but actually as a two-way. And also thanks a lot for the case what we got earlier. Let me see. Okay, now there is a first question coming in. Can you share a best practice on how you can focus your effort, as you called it, during the renewals?
Yeah, so what we do is we really, we gave the example with like a 50, 30, and 20% revenue split. Often for a lot of companies, that split is less obvious. So it's you have some customers have, and we can speak for Younium, you have maybe there's like 5 customers that make up 60% or something of our revenue or something like this. So you can imagine that we spend most. They have like dedicated account managers, dedicated support. You can play with that on how you want to do that, and it also depends on the quantity of customers. But really look into like how much money can I gain and can I spend on 20% or like big chunks of your revenue. Kind of the scenario we gave is already kind of best practice. So really make sure that you know what customers represent which value. And if you measure their NPS on a regular basis, we do it, for instance, I think once a quarter or twice a year or something. I don't know exactly, to be honest. So also, if we get like a lower NPS rate, we put extra forces on those. So we manage the exceptions, if I can say it like this. And the happy customers, of course, have their dedicated account manager dependent on size. But when something is wrong, when maybe buttons are not used, when the solution is not understood by the customer in full, or they only understand part of your value, make sure you spend that time to that the customer is aware of the full value of your solution. Do that in order of highest value of revenue, I guess.
Thank you, and I'm really happy that audience also raised something what I was about to ask. Can Younium apply indexation in the bulk, but also exclude certain customers and index them differently? So how this will work in the system? Yes.
So you can we call it now. It's called something different. It's called order change or something. But indeed, we can do indexations. You can say like, I want to now do per 1st of January indexation for all my customers, but you also have a filter. There you can filter, as an example, I want to only index the ones that are going to be, that have an agreement to be indexed upon renewal. And then it will index those with relevant percentages agreed, of course. But if there's one customer that called you midway because they're really unhappy with something and you want to exclude them, even though it was agreed, then you can still, filter those out case by case if you want, but you can do it in bulk.
Great. One more question about the solution. Does Younium support both active and automatic renewal?
Yes. Oh. Yes. Yeah. Short answer. Sorry. Yes.
And I think this is the last one, if I see it correctly. Yeah. How much time in advance does Younium recommend to start talking about renewing the next term?
Yeah, really depends, of course. You have a lot of customers that have lower average revenue per account. So, if you have a 10 euro revenue per account customer, maybe you don't speak to them on a weekly basis. Maybe you don't speak to them at all, and make sure they're happy with your marketing team, that your marketing doesn't only focus on, bringing customers in, but also keeping them aware during their stay of the great things you're doing. So that's the effort you should do on the lower revenue. On the higher tier revenue, I would say at least 3 months before the notice period. And typically, when you have bigger customers, the notice period is already 3 months. So then you're always, 6 months before the actual renewal, but you do renewal date. So the notice period is more important there, at least 3 months. But think scheduling, having a dedicated account manager on higher revenue accounts, that they have a person that they can spar with, talk to on a regular basis is, of course, always best. But actually bringing up the topic of renewal on the table at least 3 months before the notice period, I would say.
Cool. Thank you all for the questions, and thanks, Walter, for the answers, of course.
Yeah, my pleasure. Moving on with the content, and the second most common cause is the information leakage between sales and finance departments. So how can we glue this? We covered this slightly already, but often what is agreed between sales and the customers is not always relayed properly to finance, where the actual invoicing needs to take place. You may all know that, whispering game. You probably played it at a family event or whatever, where you whisper something to a person and then they pass it on, and then they pass it on, etc. And then the last one said what they think was what the first person started whispering. Often a lot get lost in translation and in the multiple change, or even doesn't get communicated simply because people forget. I mean, we're all human beings. So a few examples, of course, are different agreed payment terms. Sales didn't have the email where the invoice needs to be sent to, so finance cannot process the information or invoice. Or certain product configurations are sold. I know this one personally, that do not exist in the finance system. Different billing and discount agreements that don't reach finance and so on. I think most of you have at least seen cases like this. If not, it's probably likely your CFO is selling the solution, because then he cares about these details. But still, we're cowboys, sometimes forget things. It happens. A great way to counter this miscommunication is by implementing a subscription management hub that talks with other tools in the quote to cash process, like the finance or accounting system, and of course the CRM system, but many others. To start a quote to order process, we take the quote, usually following a dialogue with customers that is logged in CRM systems, containing the customer address detail, contact information, all the things we just talked about. Then depending on, of course, which CRM you use and if it has quotation possibilities, you create the quote there, or in, for instance, a tool like Younium. When the quote is then won and the CRM is linked to Younium Finance, is automatically triggered, and all relevant information that was agreed with the customer is then sent to finance in our approval workflow. So, if finance agrees, they can simply turn the signed quote into a running subscription. Or, if they disagree, like, hey, we missed the invoice email address, you're still early stage, you know what you're missing, you contact the customer, add it, and you move on. But if it's all good, the subscription is an approved subscription that has finance blessing all over it. The output of such a subscription, of course, is then the cool metrics and the revenue results we booked. And of course, the invoice is an output that can be sent out at this moment. We talk invoice can also, of course, be kind of direct debit or credit card structures as well. It's just the money we get. We talked about a few cases where invoicing gone wrong can have quite intense consequences. So let's talk about avoiding that. So we are strong believers of subscription-based billing. And the reason, which we also covered in the last slide, is that we turn over an actual quote, which had the customer signature on it, that is used to drive the invoice forward. This means the chance on there being any confusion and discussions or on what will be invoiced to whom and by when is at the very least greatly reduced. So rather than speaking about this for another 30 minutes, our chat host, Monica, can send you a link to a nice subscription billing blog right here in the chat. Hoping we already gave you some interesting tips, I would like to leave you with 2 metrics that can help you track the success of implementing a few of these tips. So the first metric is the customer lifetime value. It measures the average stay of your customers and the value that represents. So it's your average revenue per account times the duration and average customer stays. When using the tips around renewal management, we trust the customers stay a bit longer and are more happy and are more likely to even upsell, which can instantly be seen in this specific metric. So for especially implementing next level renewal management, look at the lifetime value. I think it's really good. Also, we recommend looking at the net retention rate. The net retention rate is visualized over a percentage. So 100% retention for like a monthly cohort in periods of time means if you have 100% retention, means you don't have any upsell or downsell. That means from the 5 customers you signed in January, 10 months later, it's still 100%. It means the revenue didn't decrease or increase. If the percentage is 110, it means you actually grow revenue on the customers you signed within a certain period. And if it drops below 100, it unfortunately means you decrease. So a good overall percentage, if we upsell on our base, would be 116%, right? If we have the 16% average growth. So, you know, again, rather than talk about metrics for 2 more hours, Monica can also put a link in the chat with our subscription metrics, blogs or webinars, as there are many more to look at than just these 2, of course, but these really apply to these specific initiatives we talk about today. With this slide, we have already come at the end of the content piece of the webinar, but to shortly summarize what we have discussed, you know, renewal management, again, is imperative. Stay sharp and close to your customers. Don't be too late checking in with them. Know what happens within your customers' markets, industries, and also your competitive landscape. I think is crucial to get a high renewal rate on those customers. Use automation in the quote to order process to ensure the information between the actual signed deal with that customer signature on it is the same one that ends up at the finance desk, you know, at the end of the chain, because that reduces the risk. Make sure you apply what we call subscription billing to ensure that the contract that was agreed in that quote is also then invoiced accordingly to that client to ensure they know what they pay for. Because not only does it increase happiness, but a customer receiving a correct invoice that they're expecting also means you will have money on the bank a bit faster. And we all love cash, because if you get an invoice you're expecting, you know it's good, you will pay for it. It will be in the next, you know, payment run. It's really good. But if it's slightly off, you have internal discussions, they send it to, you know, the relevant contact person you had. It's weeks, and if you do that for 100 customers, weeks can be a lot of money. And last but not least, you know, measure and even celebrate success, of course, you book by applying these initiatives. This way you stay on top and keep steering the business instead of just becoming a reporting engine. Really drive growth as finance. I think it's very possible. Yeah. We have many customers that gave us this input, so thank you to these customers. But as I said in the beginning, we work with a selection of just a few cases. So let us know your cases, and if you want to talk with us or myself with one of these cases, I think Monica can leave some links in the chat to make sure you can book some time with me or others for a good one-on-one to discuss your case. I have talked way more than I need to today, so you know, looking forward to hear what you think from all of this, and I would like to hand back over to Voye for the last Q&A.
Thank you so much, Walter. Really good insights as always, and the whole topic is very interesting. How everything is tailored together. That basically from the start to the beginning, you need to have it, yeah, in a good 360 view of it. Super good. Okay, before we go into the last part or last Q&A of today's webinar, let me just take a bit of like 2 minutes to introduce who we are, of course, and what does Younium do. So Younium is a subscription management solution. We are B2B SaaS niche. So these are the scenarios where we bring the most value. Currently, we have offices in Sweden, Netherlands, and USA. Over 70 employees. I think that we are 73, if I'm correct, Walter. Maybe, yeah.
Probably I can't keep up.
Yeah, growing quite fast there. And customers all around the world. So you can also check the customer stories on our website. And Monica also shared our LinkedIn page. So feel free to connect either with Walter, either with Monica, or with me. We are more than happy to look at your cases or to look at if you have any question there. We are more than happy to be connected. Yeah, that will be really nice. Okay, also feel free to share this webinar with your colleagues. As I said, we are going to send you the recording in a couple of days. But now let's go into the last Q&A part of today's webinar. So feel free to use the chat or the Q&A section to ask Walter if something popped up during the second bit of the webinar. Okay, I think that we have the first question coming in. We saw discount options in one of your slides. Does Younium support temporary discounts as well? As example, first 3 months for free of charge?
Yes, Yes, so absolutely, very common use case in SaaS. Like you said, we're niche there. So very common use case to apply temporary discounts, and that's possible in 3 ways. So absolutely possible, yes.
We actually work with the customer referrals quite a lot, but have difficulties keeping track of temporary discounts we provide as a thank you for the referral. And good question. Can Younium automate that as well?
Yes, yeah, it's I just said it's 3 ways. That's one of the 3 ways. So, because that's not at the start of a contract, right? I mean, it can be in the middle, it can be after 3 months, whatever. So Younium can make like a referral discount. It's a negative amount in the subscription, which has a specific, we call it charges. And a charge is something you charge, but can also decharge, like you retract money. So you can put a specific time, like, customer now gets the 3-month referral discount, and it only applies to the start and end date of that specific charge. So for those 3 months, the customer will get a credit, and even if that's billed annually, they get it at one go, of course. But if it's billed monthly, they will just get a 3-month free of charge period. So yes.
Great. One more interesting question, and also connected to the solution. How does Younium quote to order workflow work? Can finance actually authorize and reject information from signed quote? If so, what happens when the information is rejected and sales has to go back to the customer? That's a very, very good one.
Yeah, it's a good, but also a very common one, I would say. So, yes. So, for instance, what either you have like we have integrations. You can check that on our website. We have integrations to many CRM systems, or we have our own quotation module as well. But let's say sales forgot that invoice email address, and then they win the order, but they still didn't have it. But they win the order because commission. We need to proceed in the process in the CRM, and then finance receives what we call in Younium a draft order. So that's where finance gets a trigger, either in Slack or email or in Younium itself, pop-up window like, hey, Steve from sales just won a nice deal, go and have a look. They check it, and then they can decide 2 things. If they edit it and they notice the invoice address is missing, they can decide like, okay, I'm going to help my buddy Steve. We had a nice Friday afternoon drink, so I'm going to help him out and edit the invoice email itself. Or you can reject it, be firm, or you can, call Steve, hey, please call the customer before I activate it. Because, it's a system like this is not going to make sales remember to put in the invoice email address unless you make it a mandatory field in the CRM, which we also see a lot of customers do. That's a nice tip. But if it happens, it's better to call the customer straight away when the order is done, rather than after a few weeks when you need to send the invoice. So that's why we have this authorization workflow there. Sorry for a long answer, but it's a common case.
Yeah. Common case.
Yeah.
Does Younium have dashboards that present the metrics shown today? And also a couple of blogs we shared. Monica has shared them in the chat box.
Yes, absolutely. We have net retention, of course, and with the information Younium offers, you can also calculate lifetime values and average revenue per accounts. And so of course, we support in that to make sure that you can keep track of that, and it's lively run from the subscription you create. So
thank you, and thank you also for the question. And we have the last one here. You talked about sales and finance and CRM to subscription integration. Is there actual connection between Younium and customer success tools?
Yes, so that's more relevant when you talk. So there's a lot of companies that have customer success software that also manage the renewals part. So especially relevant for the renewals topics we had today. We also integrate, for instance, with Start Deliver, which is the customer success platform. And that's where when there's renewals coming up, you can set up triggers in the customer success tool that the customer success manager also knows, 3 months in advance, depending on when you set the trigger, we need to have this conversation. And the customer success tool then also knows what is the revenue, what is the NPS. So, all those things we just talked about can then be run from that tool, from the customer success team, while the finance cares more about, the financial part, and the sales cares more about the CRM part. So each has their own view, but it's centralized from Younium data. So we call it like the single source of truth, and that's why we integrate also with customer success applications.
Great. Thank you so much, Walter, and thank you all for the questions. And thank you all for joining this this webinar. It was great to have you with us. We will send you the recording in a couple of days. Feel free to share it with your colleagues. Also, feel free, as Walter mentioned, and then we mentioned a couple of times, reach out to us if you have any questions. Next webinar and next Younium webinar will be in end of June, so keep an eye also on that one. And I will also say, if you're planning some holidays in this, I think it's very busy time for sales, no? Super busy time for sales. But yeah, have nice couple of days off if you're taking those now. And of course, have a nice summer if you don't talk before that. Thank you all. Yeah, thank you, Monica, also for sharing all of the articles in the chat box, and have a nice rest of the day.
Yes, thank you all.
Bye-bye.